2023 was a pretty big year when it comes to video game releases, and unfortunately, I didn't get around to playing a lot of them. For example, I really didn't have any interest in playing Baldur's Gate 3. It just doesn't really look like my type of game. I also don't own a PlayStation 5, so I literally couldn't play Final Fantasy 16 or Spider-Man 2, even though I really want to play Final Fantasy 16. Like, I even bought a physical version of Final Fantasy 16. Completely on a whim. I don't know why. It's just sitting there in the case. I literally cannot play it. I also really am interested in checking out the Resident Evil franchise at some time, so I'm tempted to pick up the RE4 remake, but I just haven't done it quite yet. Also, Street Fighter 6. Probably the game I want to play the absolute most that came out last year that I did not get around to at all. I really been trying to get more into fighting games, and Street Fighter 6 looks phenomenal, so I really want to check it out, but unfortunately I did not. So let's talk about what I did play. Well, I spent most of the year actually checking out past video game releases that I missed, and thankfully video games don't expire, and I really think these lists should be populated with a lot of different releases and not just 2023 releases. So let's kick off this video with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. And yeah, the transition from 2D to 3D Kirby was pretty much flawless. It's honestly a bit weird that it didn't happen sooner, given just how smooth it went. This game just plays so well, and each level is almost up there with Mario 3D World level quality. It just has such interesting enemies, fun mini puzzles, a lot of fun little platforming sections, and sure, you know, comparing it to the greatest 3D platforming legend of all time in Mario is a bit unfair, and the quality is not quite there, but still, it has a lot of potential for Kirby in the 3D atmosphere, and I'll be honest, I was a little bit burnt out by the end of the experience, but thankfully the final portion of the game is really insane and finishes on a really high note, so it really roped me back in. And honestly, this game is fantastic. I cannot wait to see what these devs do next for the Kirby franchise, so a really quick and easy A tier to start off my 2023 recap video. Speaking of Mario, this was a pretty big year for the guy, as we saw the release of a Mario movie. And the movie was alright, you know, it was okay, but it did make me catch the Mario bug, and I wanted to play some classic Mario games around the time the movie was releasing, so I played Super Mario World, one of the few Super Nintendo era 2D Mario games I've actually never gotten around to play before, and obviously it's legendary for a reason. It's crazy good. It's kind of insane how well a game from 1990 still feels this good 33 years later. It is so fun to this day. The world is still so colorful and magical and creative and super fun, and I can definitely see how games like this help to build Mario's crazy legacy that has lasted 30 plus years. It's so insane how this game is this old and still feels this fun and satisfying to play. And Mario's legacy saw another addition this year with Super Mario Wonder. And honestly, it's pretty funny that a common comment I saw in reviews about Super Mario Wonder was that it was the best Mario platformer since Super Mario World. And now after playing both of them, not only is it as good as Super Mario World, it's literally just better. The game is absolutely wonderful, no pun intended. The controls are buttery smooth. I really do not get how Nintendo consistently makes such well-controlling games. It just feels so great to play, and the levels are filled to brim with a masterclass level design and creative elements that constantly flip everything you know about a 2D Mario game completely on its head. Obviously, everyone talks about the Wonder Seeds and just how creative they are. I will say that my one smallish complaint is that I think the new Super Mario games had a slightly better couch co-op experience, and actually found myself enjoying Super Mario Wonder more so as a solo player than a multiplayer experience, and also that Yoshi kind of means that you're playing on easy mode, which is a very selfish complaint because I love playing as Yoshi, so I wanted to play as Yoshi the whole game, but obviously I felt kind of weird doing that. But yeah, again, this game is fantastic, absolutely an S-tier game. Really exciting to see that Mario devs still have it in them to make a side-scrolling Mario game that is this creative and this fun. I cannot wait to see how Nintendo possibly follows a game like this up. And I promise I didn't only play Mario games this year, but I'm going to follow the trend right now and fit in an excuse and talk about Mario Kart 8 Deluxe for just a moment. The DLC continued to release this year and brought us a few more retro courses into the game, and some great original tracks, like Yoshi's Island, for example. I definitely wish we got some more original tracks, given how great that one actually ended up turning out, but all in all, we get an excuse to return and play a ton of Mario Kart this year, and it's probably my second most played game the entire year, given how much I was invested in the online mode of this game for some reason. Probably the game I played the second most, besides probably Overwatch 2. And yes, I'm an Overwatch fan. It's sort of embarrassing to admit, I'll be honest, but I just haven't found another online game as satisfying to play with a group of friends online as Overwatch 2. And there are still just so many interesting characters in Overwatch 2, and the game plays completely uniquely depending on which character and which role you're playing as, and despite the very valid criticism the game receives all the time, it is still very polished at the end of the day. And speaking of those characters, we got the very long promised story DLC missions this year with Overwatch 2 Invasion. and it was fine. Like, it was okay. The gameplay was a little bit bland. They definitely could have introduced some more creative enemies and elements into the missions, like maybe some puzzle aspects, but I think they're on the right track with at least some of the last levels you kind of played in that game. I think the next ones they could do could be potentially very interesting, and they could definitely improve it quite a lot. But the world and the story of Overwatch is still just so amazing. If you don't want to play the DLC, you can look up the cinematics and the cutscenes of the DLC itself for Overwatch Invasion. It's really, really exciting. The characters are so interesting and so cool, and the world itself is just so creative and fun. I love the Overwatch universe so much, still to this day. I think it's really cool and a pretty satisfying experience to see those characters and worlds continue to evolve, but missions themselves left quite a lot to be desired. I just hope that the next iteration of missions turn out a little bit better. Thankfully though, there was a multiplayer game that released this year that has potential to give Overwatch a run for its money. The finals really came out of nowhere and has gunplay that is almost perfect. Seriously, I can't believe how quick and easy it was to pick up this game and just completely understand how the gunplay works and the mechanics of the game. It just felt so natural and so right after playing so many different shooters throughout the years. And the first night playing this game with my friends was probably one of the best nights I've had playing online since the prime days of Fortnite. Seriously, the finals has so much potentials to do such amazing things. It has an incredibly solid foundation with its base game mode and the different mechanics it has and gunplay and abilities and items. They really need to double down on this game and really, really work on it and have even more maps, new guns, bigger modes, different types of gameplay, different elements introduced in the finals. I'm not going to say it's bare bones right now, but it definitely has a lot of room for improvement, and I definitely can see myself getting bored of this game if they don't act on those potentials. The same cannot be said for Modern Warfare 3, and I feel so stupid for being excited for this game. Like, I played the new Modern Warfare 2, and I should have known how far Call of Duty has fallen from its former glory, but somehow I never learned my lesson, and I thought this year's release was going to be different because they're bringing back classic maps, and I don't know why that tricked me, because all it feels like now is that they were lazy and didn't want to make new maps. And after playing like 10 matches and a couple nights in a row, I realized the systems of Modern Warfare 3 were just not satisfying at all. I really just miss the classic level progression of old Call of Duties where you just unlock new guns, the attachments for the guns, you build a class, you change your kill streaks, you change your perks, you change your kill streaks, and that's it. That's all you need to do. Again, they keep on trying to re-innovate the wheel when they really don't need to, and the way they're doing it is trying to introduce things like microtransactions and really, really pushing you to buy a battle pass, and it's absurdly frustrating. The gameplay is still there to be decent, like it still feels good and actually feels better than Modern Warfare 2 in my personal opinion, but still, it was not satisfying the itch of classic Call of Duties, and I really, really, really want classic Call of Duties just to come out to Game Pass as soon as possible, because I really want to get those feelings of great Call of Duty games once again. And yeah, Game Pass, woo, okay, I love Game Pass. No, I'm not sponsored, but I seriously really love Game Pass. It gets me to play so many games I definitely would not get around to playing, such as Forager, an indie game that I highly recommend to any Minecraft fan out there. It definitely kind of scratches that crafting, survival, and farming itch, while it's also very much so its own thing. I seriously sat down and played this game like for a week straight. I would sit down and play this game for like hours at a time, something I normally don't do. I usually have a pretty short attention span, but this game was so addicting. The mechanics and everything just happening in the game at real time really kept me just constantly active to play this game, which is crazy for like a farming, crafting, survival simulator game. It just had really, really great experiences. Again, it definitely could be better. There's a lot of bugs and improvements on this version that were not the best. I played it on my Xbox, so a little bit frustrating at times, and the burnout definitely happened really hard when it finally happened, but still, I don't really see many people talking about it, so I really highly recommend a lot of people check it out. A Short Hike is also great. It's actually better than great. I would say Short Hike is phenomenal, and this was such a pleasant surprise and almost a therapeutic kind of experience to play this game. I did not really realize I needed to have a game like this in my life until I beat it, and by beating it, I mean I played it for like 2 hours. It's so short and non-committal and absolutely amazing just for that. The greatest comparison I can make for this game is it feels like I'm playing on Outset Island on Wind Waker. Yes, the starting island of Wind Waker, where you basically just complete a tutorial on how to play the game and the way the world works. On my GameCube, I would explore every inch of this island just for fun. I don't really know why, but playing A Short Hike brought back that nostalgia of just going around an island, literally just an island, and running around and doing random stuff and just talking to people and doing very random kind of side quest sort of things that I really didn't need to do, with one goal I needed to do that really I didn't need to do. It's kind of hard to explain, but again, it's like a therapeutic experience to check out this game. Absolutely a 10 out of 10 game in my personal opinion. Please check this out. A Short Hike is amazing. Now, a more well-known indie game on Game Pass I checked out was Dead Cells, and I really wish I liked this game the same way I was hooked onto Hades a few years ago. I stand by Hades being one of my absolute favorite, more modern game releases ever. It's just so good, and I was really hoping Dead Cells could satisfy that craving with, a similar roguelike experience. And don't get me wrong, the game is definitely high quality. I can tell it's a well-made game with a lot of fans and a lot of developer support, and the game itself is satisfying to play at times, and there were moments where I really understood why people love Dead Cells so much. But with that being said, it just unfortunately did not click with me the way I really had hoped it had, and I ended up dropping it really not too much into the game. Like, I got my time out of it, and I like doing those runs, but for the most part, I just really wish it hooked me the same way that Hades did, because again, I cannot wait for Hades 2. That game is phenomenal, but Dead Cells, it was good. It was solid. I recommend checking out if you like Hades, if you like roguelikes, then definitely check this one out. But again, for me, it just was not the same. And of course, it's not trying to do the same things, but for me, just did not enjoy it quite as much. Okay, let's talk about a game I sunk considerably more time into this year, and that is Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. And oh my goodness, okay, this game series really is absolutely something else. I played the first 2 games last year, and I 1000% did not expect to enjoy those games at all. It's really weird. I only played these games like a year ago, but I have such fond memories of Danganronpa 1 and 2 with their memorable characters and their crazy story moments and twists, and I highly recommend checking those games out even if you're not a fan of visual novel games. They're just so wacky and out there and engaging, and I really have great memories of playing those 2 experiences. With that said, Danganronpa V3 is my least favorite of those 3 games by quite a wide margin, unfortunately, and it's not because it's doing anything radically different, but rather because it's kind of doing more of the same, and sure, it does have its own set of crazy twists, and the first trial was definitely a standout for those twists, one of my absolute favorite trials of any of the games, hands down. But as the game went on more and more, I realized I just wasn't nearly as invested in the story or the characters as the previous 2 entries of Danganronpa, partially due to the series fatigue, but I feel like I can unbiasedly say that this was the weakest cast of students out of any of the games. Kokichi is the one standout though, like maybe my favorite character in the entire franchise. What does that say about me? I don't really know, but regardless, I'm happy to put this series behind me, finishing up the final trials and twists. They got a little too wacky. I feel like the game thought it was doing something mind-blowing and epic, but to me, it was just kind of, full of itself. Does that mean to say? I don't know. But anyways, I'm kind of happy to have this series behind me. It wasn't bad. It was a fun experience to go through, but still, I'm ready to move on from Danganronpa. Speaking of visual novel games, we have Escape Academy. Weirdly, yeah, this is kind of like a visual novel thing, and I honestly wasn't having any of it, unfortunately. I tried at first to be invested in the Escape Academy world and characters, but honestly, that didn't last long at all. Like, thankfully, the multiplayer experience of the game was genuinely really fun, and I think it was such a cool experience to run through a puzzle game like this with other people and having a really fun couch co-op multiplayer experience. If you have any interest in puzzle games at all, I extremely recommend checking out Escape Academy, but the story and the world just were not it, in my personal opinion. Another attempt this year at a fun multiplayer experience was Party Animals, and yeah, this is a little bit disappointing for me. I was definitely hoping for some more out of it. I was definitely hoping for a little bit more innovation in this genre, but I was left pretty disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I had fun with it for a little bit. It just did not hold my interest at all. Like, I really played it for just a tiny bit, and then I don't really have any desire to go back after it. I'd rather play a lot of other multiplayer games instead. With Party Animals being a 2023 release, I should probably talk about a few more 2023 releases once again. So let's talk about Starfield. Okay, oh boy. All right, so it's no secret that I've been an Xbox fan this generation, as I've been talking about Game Pass, and as of right now, I literally don't own a PlayStation 5. So with that said, it's a given. I was really pulling for something like Starfield to be absolutely amazing. But it's not awful. It's about on par with the other Bethesda releases we've seen lately. But in the era of modern gaming, that's just unfortunately not enough to win me over to playing a game like Starfield. And I don't really think it's entirely the game's fault. Like, if Skyrim released today, I just don't think I personally would be as invested in it as I was when it originally came out back when I was in middle school. To the gaming landscape as a whole, it's just not the same. I really don't have the time to commit hundreds of hours into games of these giant open worlds and universes. And honestly, yeah, literally literally universes with something like Starfield, and I just don't have the time to commit into these games unless I absolutely fall in love with it. For example, like Elden Ring last year, I've spent hundreds of hours in that game because the world, the gameplay, everything like that just absolutely hooked me. But Starfield, unfortunately, the mechanics nor the world really warranted that much of a commitment. Also, a very big first world problem here, 30 FPS on a console experience that you're exclusive to is just not cutting it in 2023. It was honestly distracting to play. I started this game and I said, am I in quality mode and not performance mode? I gotta go in performance mode. I realized there's not an option at all to get out of 30 FPS on Xbox. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's just not cutting it. It feels unnatural and gross, especially in a first-person shooter. I'm so sorry, Starfield. I'm really sorry, Bethesda, because I'm seriously rooting for you guys to have a big hit, but this was a swing and a miss in my personal opinion. But Xbox did have at least one solid hit this year with Hi-Fi Rush. People absolutely love this game, and I definitely enjoyed my experience with it, but I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys and say that I absolutely loved it. It's one of the best games I've ever played, because I didn't really love it. Like, I can see the high-quality product in front of me. I just didn't click with me. I'm like not the biggest fan of rhythm games. Well, I think they're really cool. I'm just not good at them. So I really didn't get the fun rhythm-based combat that everyone talks so highly about with this game. And unfortunately, yeah, it just did not super click with me, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, I still think it is a high-quality product. I think the world, the characters, everything like that were interesting. I just didn't love it, but again, it was a fun time. Star Wars Jedi Survivor also came out this year, and it's honestly pretty weird to look back just how under the radar the buzz for this game has been after its release. I remember a lot of people being genuinely very excited for it to come out because I definitely really liked Fallen Order, but then the game came out and people roasted its ass for its absolutely unexcusable bugs and glitches. Then after that, pretty much nothing was heard about this game. Like, people just didn't talk about it at all. However, my experience with the game myself was pretty great, all things considered. Like the bugs and everything really didn't get to me too badly. There were some weird moments, but nothing too crazy. The gameplay as a whole doubled down from Fallen Order, and the story was an improvement for the most part. I don't love the story of either of those games personally, but the thing I will fault this game for the most is it tried to go too big with the aspects that and I think a lot of other people didn't really think were necessary. There's a really large amount of open world exploration, which is kind of cool. At the same time, like, I want to explore the world of space and not really this one singular planet that's interesting, but not like super interesting. And there's a lot of collectibles and little kind of small offhand side quests you can go and do, and honestly started to feel like more like a chore than anything else. Like, they just weren't that satisfying to complete, and these aspects weren't necessarily bad additions to the game because they were, for the most part, pretty, decent. But I think the efforts put forth for those aspects could have been used more beneficial somewhere else. Again, the main story contains some great level exploration. I actually think people are way too hard on the level exploration of this game and the first game. I actually think the combat felt really satisfying and slick. I actually ended up playing with the crossguard, which felt really heavy and powerful to use, and I thought it was so cool. But there's so many other styles that you can use the lightsaber with, and it was just so cool to use the Force and the lightsabers. It reminded me again of Force Unleashed way back in the day. Not quite as crazy with the Force abilities as that game, but still it was handled very well in my opinion. And also there's some pretty solid boss fights in this game. There's two in particular I thought were absolutely fantastic. Again, without saying any spoilers, one of them was on a ceiling and the other one was surrounded by fire. Those two boss fights were phenomenal. Hopefully that's not giving anything away. It probably shouldn't. But last thing to say about Star Wars Jedi Survivor is that this game did a great job of reminding me how much I absolutely love Star Wars. The franchise has definitely had a few rough years recently, but this is definitely a standout installment. Okay, let's talk about Alan Wake. And no, I'm not talking about Alan Wake 2, but Alan Wake 1, a game I bought for like $5 while considering checking out the sequel, because around this time, the reviews were dropping for Alan Wake 2, and they were absolutely incredible. But the original game did a pretty great job of making me doubt those reviews, unfortunately. I just didn't really love it. Like, the story and the atmosphere and the world of Alan Wake were really cool, and I can definitely see why people absolutely love the story of this game, but the gameplay was really boring. I'm sorry, it really does have really big PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 vibes to it, which again, the game came out in 2010. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It just did not feel like I was playing it very well. A lot of times the levels seemed to drag on and on again. I would get somewhere and then the guy goes, you have to meet me somewhere else. And I go, oh, you're kidding me. And I have to walk through more levels of the woods, and then through an abandoned trailer park, and then more through another different mountain, and then through more woods. And I'm like, okay, I'm exhausted. This isn't very fun for me. But I won't completely write off checking out the sequel at some point, because again, the story and the atmosphere of Alan Wake were really interesting, and the things I've heard about Alan Wake 2 are insanely good. So I really definitely want to check out Alan Wake 2 at some point, but again, Alan Wake 1 didn't convince me I need to run out and buy it immediately, which is a little unfortunate. Let's stay on topic about dated games and talk about Pokemon Colosseum. Yes, I actually got to experience a new Pokemon game this year that I had been missing out on for 20 plus years. It's kind of crazy to think about considering how much of a Pokemon fan I am, and especially way back in the early 2000s, but alas, I finally got around to playing Pokemon Colosseum, and like I kind of said, yeah, it was alright. It definitely is a bit dated, like I was mentioning a second ago. The story was okay at best, honestly. It was a bit weird, like very, very weird, and the gameplay was definitely still Pokemon, but the selection of the Pokemon and the process of purifying your team members was a bit clunky and not the best in my personal opinion. And again, maybe I'm just bad at these games, but the game balancing really didn't feel great at all, especially the endgame battles, which took me an embarrassing amount of tries to actually finish up and beat them. And again though, I want to stress that I did love the experience. I really think it's really cool to go back in the GameCube era of Nintendo and of Pokemon and actually play a Pokemon installment I never had played before, because for some reason I got Pokemon XD and Colosseum as a kid, but I learned that XD was newer and I said Colosseum's useless, and I threw it in a box that I just found 20 plus years later. So yeah, definitely took me way too long to get around to playing Colosseum, but I'm glad I got to play it because again, the game is still Pokemon and I love Pokemon, so I definitely had a great time playing it. Okay, I also replayed Dark Souls again. Yeah, I played this game pretty much every year at this point. Just for some reason, it's become a yearly tradition to run through Dark Souls 1, and I promise this year I actually had a reason. I had never played Artorias of the Abyss, you know, the well-renowned DLC released for Dark Souls 1 more than 10 years ago at this point. For some reason, I just never got around to playing it. I don't know if I was just stupid and I couldn't figure it out, how to unlock the DLC, but I realized I hadn't played it because I was hearing people talk about the Artorias boss fight, and I said, I haven't done it. You know, I've never actually played that DLC. And thankfully, I got around to playing it this year, did another playthrough of Dark Souls because I love it. And I'm happy to say that DLC and the hype around the DLC is very, very justified. I will say it's quite a lot shorter than I expected. Maybe its notoriety inflated my perception of how long the DLC experience was going to be. But what was there is some of the greatest boss fights in the series, especially Artorias. Like, it's crazy how great this boss is between both the lore and the music, and of course the actual fight itself was phenomenal. Artorias boss fight may be one of the best in the entire franchise, hands down. Let's stay on the DLC train and talk about Champion's Ballad for Breath of the Wild. And oddly enough, this DLC also includes the best boss battle in the entire game, which is really weird. I'm not going to spoil anything, but outside that boss battle, the DLC is kind of like it plays into the challenge aspect the other Breath of the Wild DLCs were going for, but I don't know, it just seems a bit tacked on to the entire experience, just doesn't feel very natural or a big expansion on the game. And the weird scavenger hunt that takes up a large chunk in the majority of the DLC's contents were not great. Like, I had to look a lot of stuff up for this game, and I really hate looking stuff up for video games, and it was a little frustrating to do so. But again, the entire thing took place in Breath of the Wild, a world and experience that I absolutely have no problem spending some extra time in. So all in all, I did have a good time with it. But let's talk about why I came back to this DLC now, all these years after Breath of the Wild. Well, duh, yeah, it was in preparation for Tears of the Kingdom, one of my most anticipated game releases possibly ever came out this year, and it's following up one of my greatest games of all time with Breath of the Wild. And when I saw those reviews drop for Tears of the Kingdom, I could not be more excited. And then I finally got to play it myself, and I didn't get too far and felt kind of burnt out on the experience. That's right, I didn't actually end up beating Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, I only got through a single major dungeon. Granted, that's still 40 plus hours sunk into the experience, but I just couldn't find the motivation to push through to get to the end of the game. And there's actually quite a few reasons as to why this possibly was. First is that the game released at a pretty inconvenient time for me personally. I'm not going to get too into the specifics, but finding time to invest into a 100 plus hour long, all-encompassing experience was just not happening at the time of the game's release. Second, the game is just a bit too similar to Breath of the Wild. Granted, that's not really a bad thing, and there definitely is a lot of innovation from Breath of the Wild into Tears of the Kingdom, but I just had a pretty big feeling that I've done it all before. I already explored pretty much every inch of this Hyrule and hunted down all these different shrines and Koroks and discovered my memories, and it just followed way too similar flow and setup as the first game, which leads me to another point. It didn't really feel like a true sequel to Breath of the Wild that really followed up the last game's story, but more like a rehash of similar events in the Zelda world. But with all that being said, I still only beat up to the very first dungeon. There's a lot more that this game definitely has to offer that I have not given a fair amount of time to seeing or experiencing, and yeah, I'm not done with this game. In fact, I'm really set to start a new save file and get the entire experience another go, another attempt, because I've heard absolutely stellar things about some of the moments of this game, and as a major Zelda fan, I love the franchise and I really want to see those experiences firsthand, so I cannot wait to jump back into Tears Tears of the Kingdom and give it another shot. I'll definitely have a video talking about it in the future when I eventually do end up beating it. But as of right now, the game I completely expected to wipe the floor and be my game of the year is going on to be unranked and to be determined before dropping it on my tier list. So what is my game of the year for 2023? Well, of course, it's Baldur's Gate 3. That's right. When I said I hadn't played it and that I wasn't that interested in it, I was just lying. Yeah, that's right. It's Lies of P. This game makes no sense. I'm sorry, but how is a Souls-like game based on the story of Pinocchio literally this good? Like, really good. I think the game definitely gets overlooked quite a lot this year because of those aspects I just mentioned. It's a Souls-like game, which tend to make people think the developers are creatively bankrupt and kind of lazy and just piggybacking off From Software and other developers. Sure, the gameplay at its core is very similar to the Dark Souls experience, and that's not a bad thing, but this game also has so many unique mechanics going on that it's filled to the brim with creative ideas, such as the weapon combinations and the Legion arms, and of course the really satisfying parry and stagger mechanics that all just click together so beautifully. This game feels like butter to play, and the biggest compliment I can give to the game is it feels like it's a mix of Bloodborne, Sekiro, and none other than Nier Automata. Especially in the story and atmosphere aspect, it's definitely not as philosophical as Nier Automata, but a way more personal story that follows Geppetto's puppet, exploring the beautifully dark city of Krat. And the story seriously is way better than it has any right to be, and I was invested the entire time. The one possible gripe I will say about the game is that the level design is not quite up there with From Software's absolute masterclass of level crafting, but again, that's like comparing Kirby to Mario as a 3D platformer. It's just not going to be the same, and it's not bad level design, it was just a lot more linear, which again isn't like a bad thing. It was kind of nice to not be lost the entire time, but I will say that the boss at the end of those linear levels were phenomenal. Bosses that definitely contended with From Software themselves in the way that they designed their bosses. From Software is the best in the game at making bosses, and seemingly out of nowhere this developer shows up to challenge the throne. Romeo, Lazatia, and the Nameless Puppet are 10 out of 10 boss fights and experiences, and also the ending tease, like again, no spoilers because please go play this game yourself, but are you kidding me? Anyways, there we go. That's gonna wrap it up for 2023. There's quite a few other games I could go on to talk about, but I feel like these were the 20 or so I spent the most time with this year, and I definitely feel like I want to talk about the most. Again, there are other 2023 games I would have liked to play, like Street Fighter 6 and Final Fantasy 16. In Street Fighter 6, yes, I really want to play SF6 really badly. I'll get around to it, I promise. But these were the games I did play this year and my overall opinions on them, and the ones I usually ended up liking the most. So, what will I play in 2024? Well, stick around by liking and subscribing, and I will let you know. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Let me know your favorite games of this year as well. See you next time, and bye-bye.